Good. And I don't think I need. Friends and colleagues, it's 9 o'clock, so we would like to start. So, can I first of all ask Casey or Tensi, are you in the room? Casey or Tensi, are you in the room? It's one of our speakers. We don't really know where she is. You call her. Thank you. I would like to open up this session that I'm really keen to be able to lead. Welcome to our speakers who are sitting here in the front row. I'm really curious and keen to hear about your talks. We will have oral talks. We will have a movie. We will also have an online talk that is ready, I think, waiting for us. So we will have a very diverse program here. And what we will talk about is, first, Morgan, you will have a keynote, and you will talk about the centering health, well-being, and the determinants in the Arctic climate research and adaptation of planning, right? We will also have a talk with our online speaker, Shivangi Mishra, who will talk about marine animal genomics in Kuujjuaq workshop, a collaborative research workshop model. We will have Kate or Tensi if she shows up, and she will show up. And she is talking about beneath and beyond, decolonizing a benthic baseline in Nunavut, Canada. And we will also have Justin Langer talking about the guidance of the Arctic, integrating indigenous knowledge and youth-led eco-literacy for climate adaptation. And then our movie, we will also see that by Christian Louis Jensen on black carbon. All these things are integrated in indigenous knowledge. And if you turn the slide to next slide, the reason why I'm leading this one, can you turn to the next slide? Me? Sorry. Usually it works. So my name, I'm a senior scientist. My name is Linda Jørgensen. Stop. I have been working for more than 20 years, I think, in the Arctic Council, working a lot with the interface of indigenous knowledge and Western science, and bringing that forward to governance. And it's a bit of a burning place to be, and we have a lot to learn. And this is why I'm particularly interested in you young people coming here, telling us what did you actually do? How did you meet indigenous and Western? And I will be looking very carefully on what you have been doing, how you approach this communication interface. So I'm myself working with ecosystem-based management. The people's voice is a very important part of ecosystem-based management. What I'm also leading is a working group on the Central Arctic Ocean, integrated ecosystem assessment, where we identify what is the challenges and pressures. And I see that a lot of my colleagues is here in the room, and welcome to you all too. So why is the voice of the people so important? If you look at the center part of ecosystem-based management, which we are developing within the Arctic Council, we need to listen to the inhabitants, or those who are living in the Central Arctic Ocean. And this voice is so important. So how do we meet? How do we talk? How do we interact with each other? So all the knowledge system from all the different people in the Arctic is heard and brought forward and put on the table. And this is something that I will be looking very closely to how you did it within your different research topics I feel that you have been within. So this session is about respectful and transparent knowledge efforts, participatory sharing and exchange, and equitable use of the Arctic. And we will be looking into these questions that you bring forward. So Christian, invisible pollution, how does it threaten water, biology, and the way of life? Morgan, what are the conditions actually for health and well-being in the Arctic? I asked Kate how to establish social ecological baseline, the Inuit knowledge and experience. How did that happen? I also asked Justin, how do indigenous knowledge and youth leading make local adaptation work and international climate discussion? And I ask you, Shivangya, how to bring indigenous knowledge holders, scientists, and conservation practitioners together. And with this, I would like to invite Morgan, our key speaker. You have 20 minutes from now to introduce yourself and your work. So welcome. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. Okay. So, what comes to mind when you think of home? What makes where you call home such a special place? For many people here, the Arctic is home. For others, it's a place where we have the privilege to work and collaborate and research in. My name is Morgan Bertheusen, and I am lucky to call two places home. I grew up in Tiohtià:ke, so Montreal, with my mother, who is Quebecoise, and I also spent my upbringing in Finnmark in northern Norway, which is where my paternal family and father lives and is from. I'm also a PhD candidate, so I study at McGill University in health geography. So my work focuses on what makes people and communities healthy and well, and how are climate changes and other drivers of change impacting these conditions. I've been working with a coastal community in northwestern Canada, and more recently in coastal Alaska. So the work that I share with you today is a collaboration with the Inuvialuit hamlet of Tuktoyaktuk, located in the Inuvialuit settlement region in the Northwest Territories in Canada. Tuktoyaktuk means looks like a caribou in Inuvialuktun, and it is a hamlet of around 1,000 people, 90% of whom are Inuvialuit. And the location of Tuktoyaktuk was originally a gathering site and a harvesting site for Inuvialuit for the abundance of wildlife that this location provided, as well as the natural protection from the ocean that was provided by the harbor. However, being right on the water, there's a lot of action that comes from the ocean and ongoing wave action, coastal erosion, permafrost degradation has been impacting the natural landscape of this community. Since the 1970s, the hamlet has been actively trying to protect in place by adopting different strategies like concrete slabs, and riprap. And most recently, in July 2023, the federal government of Canada announced $53 million to protect the shoreline. But within all of this, the community is also having to plan for relocation. To date, 4 houses located along the coastline have been relocated more inland due to ongoing threats of erosion. So this work is part of a project called Nuna, and it has different work packages that identify and address, or that address different parts of the landscapes that were identified by community priorities and needs. So there's work on erosion, permafrost subsidence, air quality, as well as waterway narrowing. Our work focuses on Soraituk, so at the center, looking at health and well-being. So places are not just containers, they actively shape the way that we live our lives and contribute to influencing health outcomes. This research is grounded in social and environmental determinants of health framework that situate health, well-being, and their outcomes as the product of the conditions in which people are born, grow up in, live, work, age. And so these are known as the social environmental determinants of health. There's different models that exist and that have been developed, and the one that is on the screen here is one that was brought forth by Inuit Tapirit Kanatami, who's the national organization representing Inuit across Inuit Nunangat. And so you can see here that Inuit health is at the center of the environment, and that it's shaped by determinants like food, safety and security, the availability and accessibility of health services, education, culture, language, to name a few. And so these determinants happen kind of across different scales, and while not shown, the historical and ongoing legacies of colonialism, as well as self-determination, also contribute to impacting health outcomes. And so across many indigenous worldviews, the health of the land is the health of the people. And so when the land is threatened, so is the people whose health and well-being it supports. Health is holistic. In Nunavik, Nunavimiut have identified 3 facets of health that are all interconnected. Ilursirsursiarnik, Hanuigitsarnik, and Inuratsigitsarnik, that are depicted by the petals of the arpik or multibar, cloudberry, a berry that is widely known across the north. And so within these foundational concepts of health that are grounded in culture and language, you have the determinants of health that were identified by community members. And so by using social and environmental determinants of health approach and considering health holistically, this work sought to understand the community level conditions that contribute to health and well-being across generations, to identify where and how these conditions are impacted by environmental changes, and suggest pathways forward for adaptation planning that centers both the health of the land and the health of the people. So to do this, across the month of May and June 2023, we undertook 2 activities, a photo voice activity with youth, as well as interviews with adults and elders. These different methods were used to engage with the different age group across our research. And while they were both designed and undertaken separately, they had the same objectives and similarly used maps and pictures to facilitate discussion and reflections. This research is also grounded in a strength-based approach, focusing on what supports health before what threatens it, to have conversations around hope and sustainable community futures. And in total, 27 community members participated across both activities, 6 youth in high school, 14 adults and 7 elders. And for those who don't know or aren't familiar with Photo Voice is a community-based participatory research method that has participants speak through the photographs that they take about a specific topic. Many stories and perspectives were shared throughout, however, many remain untold. So while the work and the words that I will share with you today are not representative of everyone's experience, they do share one side of a wider set of experiences. What comes to mind when you think of home? What do you love about your community? What makes Tuktoyaktuk such a special place? These are some of the questions that we asked in our work, and here are some of the answers we got. This is my view, looking out towards the ocean. This is. So it's like I'm always out on the land. Home is more like Tuktoyaktuk and the people around it. Home is more consistent of the people and the community. For most people, this is the destination. But for us, this is our home. We Inuvialuit need to have access to the water because we're a coastal people. And we depend on the ocean so much to a great degree, not just for the food it provides, but also to the access of where we have geese, the caribou, wolves, and whatnot. So across these two research activities, information was shared on what types of environmental changes impact the various determinants of health and how they are in turn influencing the different facets of health, both mental, physical, not both, but mental, physical, and relational. And while the focus was environmental change, and it's what I will be talking about to you, climate change doesn't happen in isolation. There are other drivers of change that are taking place at the same time and that are together impacting sense of place, health, and well-being. And so as I mentioned, maps were used throughout the research to have conversations about landscape changes with youth and with adults and elders. And so to the right, you can see that youth identified and took pictures in places of their community that they love, that they found important, and where you see change. Highlighted are the places where love and or importance overlaps with change. To the left, adults and elders identified places in their communities that are geophysical changes in the landscape, but not represented here are the stories and ties to these places that were shared. And so I'll now turn to two important places that were talked about for the changes that are taking place, but also for the meaning that they hold. Which is the point at the top here and the shoreline. And I am talking to you about these two locations because these were the focus or are the focus of a lot of the adaptation and mitigation strategies that are being undertaken to protect the shoreline. It's hard to teach now, especially if there is going to be hardly any fish. And then you want to teach the young ones. There's just nothing really to teach sometimes. So many talked about the points because this area is washing away and it also holds deep historical and cultural tie. As I mentioned earlier, the point is originally where Inuvialuit harvested and still do to this day, although it's becoming harder and harder. But harvesting is not just access to food, it's also education, teaching younger ones how traditional practices of harvesting species, and it's right in people's backyard. People don't have to travel far away to have access to resources, but also to food, to culture, to land. And so this means that many are having to dedicate more time and resources to go further away in conditions that were described as being more and more unpredictable and more dangerous, having impacts on the physical safety of community members who go out. Youth were also eager to walk with us to the point and take pictures and talk about this place. They spoke about the point and their community with pride because this is the destination for people worldwide who want to drive up to the northernmost part of Canada and take pictures in front of the Arctic Ocean sign. They also talked about the many gatherings that take place there, like Inuvialuit Day and the Beluga Jamboree. However, they also spoke about fear and worry about the safety and security of people who live on the shoreline in housing that is being threatened by ongoing erosion and that are having to relocate. Youth shared a lot of preoccupation with the topic of relocation and the impacts that everything that's going on is having on their mental health. Further down the coastline, turning to the beach, This was also a place that was discussed by many participants throughout the research, not only in terms of change, but also in terms of how important this place is. When I look at it now, it's pretty much finished, the beach. We used to have a big, white, nice beach, and we used to play there when we were kids. Several people talked about the picnicking, the barbecuing, the gatherings, the exercise in the summertime, about like running on the sandy beaches. That no longer exists. In addition to the beach, the graveyard is also located nearby, and a lot were concerned with ongoing threats of erosion and what would happen if the gravesite was reached. Youth also captured and discussed the beach, although further down the spit. In fact, most of the places that youth identified in their community were places of natural infrastructure where they would come together and hang out in and spend time in. And these places are changing. Aside from those, youth talked about how they love their community because it was so convenient. The stores, the school, the point, everything is within walking distance. And so B and D there correspond to the store that was identified as love, important, and changing, right at the intersection. And so, as I mentioned earlier, youth talked about mental health a lot. And we, together with them, worked their way up to creating their collective message to the world, one that could be shared not only with their communities, but beyond. What do the voice of the youth in Tuktoyaktuk? What is the voice of the youth in Tuktoyaktuk? We want more people to care about what is happening to our traditional land and how climate change is affecting our people's mental health. The land allows us to pass down our traditional knowledge to help the next generation teach their kids and grandkids to grow up like we did. People to help us protect the land so that we don't lose Tuk. And so by this message, youth also selected some of the photographs that they had taken during the activity that they wanted to place alongside of it. And honestly, I wasn't sure that this speed writing exercise would go so well. I thought, writing, who wants to do that? But I was amazed at how passionately and seriously youth took this exercise, to the point where, the bolded words were what they wanted to have bolded, and the exclamation point at the end as well. I was typing as they were talking and put a period, and I got yelled at saying, no, we want an exclamation mark at the end of that sentence. And so when talking about mental health, youth identified the need for several things. First, they said that they needed a trusted professional that they would feel confident in going to and sharing their worries, because there is no one in the community that has that role right now. But they also talked about the need to spend more time on the land, because the land is healing. And in addition to that, being involved in different curricular activities, research even, as this took place after school over a week, fostered a sense of belonging and of agency. So I was told that, we remember things in threes, and although there's many things I want to share, here are some 3 takeaways. First, health is holistic. Western approaches tend to separate the physical dimensions of health from the mental ones, and we seldom consider the relational facets of health. But by approaching our research with this siloed approach, we don't necessarily take into account what's important and most relevant to different people. Climate change is impacting how people connect with each other and with the land. And so in this case, land is not just an ecosystem and resources, it's the foundation of health and well-being. And adopting an intergenerational lens highlights the diverse community priorities and need. Youth are seldom involved in research and in these conversations about their futures. And so not engaging with this group limits what we hear and what we can address. So I'd like to end with a conclusion. In this way, adapting to climate change is not only rooted in the physical structures that are meant to guard against the geophysical hazards, but also in the social and cultural ties embedded in place. This means looking beyond the built infrastructure and thinking about the social infrastructure. It also means fostering spaces where different generations, different cultures, different disciplines can come together and learn from each other to tackle these multifaceted challenges. And this way, you know, whether we call the Arctic our home or if it's a place where we have the privilege to work and collaborate and research in, we can work together to protect the health of the people and the health of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. That was an excellent talk. I don't know how many minutes we have for. 1 minute. Oh, you have shown a delicate balance between Western science and indigenous science. You can express the language also. I think that's also a thing to do. You are having a balance between good and the more challenging. So this balance or this wider spectrum, is that the key for having this interface cooperation?
That's a big question. I would want to say yes. It's important to have balance. I think it's important to talk about all facets, the positive and the negative, and to have these harder conversations, but that are grounded in strength. And so yes, but then, you know, in practice, it's always hard and challenging to achieve. And the way we share and talk about it too, not only wanting to share, you know, what's going wrong, because a lot of things are hard and need to be addressed. But yeah, I think that yes, that's what we strive, or what I want to strive to be able to do. Yeah.
Oh.
Done. Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, find me after if you'd like to chat.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, we can
Thank
find you. Yeah. So our next speaker will be online. So maybe you can bring her up. So Shivangia Misha, do you hear us? You work on the Arctic Genomic Project, dealing with the Arctic biodiversity and conservation issue to support and safeguard indigenous food. So if you hear us, you
I
are
can
there.
hear you.
Yeah. So welcome. Introduce yourself, and then we will love to hear your talk. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. I am Shivangi Mishra, and I'm a postdoc at the work I'm going to present is a part of my work from my previous postdoc, and I have started this new postdoctoral project this January. So without further ado, I am going to share my PPT. Is that I just shared my presentation.
We see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. As I said, that this is a presentation which focuses on some of the insights from marine animal genomics in Kuujjuaq workshop. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge that this work was carried out in Kuujjuaq, which is a part of Inuit Nunangat, the homeland of the Inuit. And the Nunavummiut knowledge holders shaped this workshop, and I acknowledge their leadership and lived experience and expertise as central to this work. I'm thankful to all the knowledge co-creators. And why magic? So we know that Arctic marine systems are changing rapidly, and the communities are the first observers of the change. So new tools like genomics and eDNA are emerging, but there is a gap around trust and governance. So MAGIC was designed to explore how genomics could support, not just replace, Inuit priorities and existing knowledge systems. It was held in Kuujjuaq from March 17 to 19th in 2025, and it brought together Inuit knowledge holders, academics, government representatives, and resident experts, such as from Nunavik Research Center. And it was focused on dialogues and lived experience and shared priorities rather than the extractive research questions. And genomics was framed as a supporting tool, not as a research driver. And the conversations were semi-structured, not just the scientific presentations or uh, uh, very much like a set of research questions and answers, but it was focused on place-based learning and dialogues and case studies and governance discussions. So knowledge systems, governance and decision making was discussed, and we know that there IQ and Western science. IQ is the foundational knowledge systems, and it is deep place-based expertise on key species, and communities have deep knowledge on the key species in their region, such as in Kuujjuaq in Arctic char was recognized as one of the most important country foods alongside ringed seals, beluga, Arctic terns, and Canada geese. IQ guides harvesting and monitoring, and governance bodies like HTO's Hunters and Trappers Organization and Nunavik Marine Region Wildlife Board guide the wildlife decisions. So scientific tools must be accountable to these systems. And genomics must deliver direct community benefits, and it should be accessible, interpretable, and locally useful while respecting the indigenous data sovereignty, consent, and reciprocity. And it should be additive, not disruptive. This image shows Alan Gordon and Sridhar Bhatnagar. And Alan Gordon is one of the Inuit community leader in Kuujjuaq. And he guided us to the town tour and he has established the community initiative, this Arctic char hatchery, and which supports food security. And this is a living example of Inuit self-determination. And in these pictures, he is representing the hatchery and how the eggs are collected at from the known spawning sites across Nunavik and then managed. There were town tours towards Nunavik Research Center, and Dr. He has contributed a lot to community-based research focused on community-identified needs in Kuujjuaq. And this center conducts science that serves Nunavik communities and incorporates local participation and response to Inuit concerns while blending the scientific methods and indigenous knowledge. There were the trip to Nunavik first, which is also which offered a unique opportunity to witness the intersection of Inuit knowledge and contemporary practices in the fur trade. And it is the only tannery in the Eastern Canadian Arctic. And these examples highlight how the community is already working and leading in the area. And when we talk about a genomic perspective, we talked it as a conditional and value added tool, but it should not be the only magic bullet. And it could support early detection of invasive species, and tools like eDNA could be helpful in the non-invasive monitoring and could support the community-led monitoring. For example, this figure shows how the Montana et al. They have worked on beluga identification. Population is structured in Eastern Canada, and the work like this could helpful for informing the co-management of biodiversity and wildlife in the region. Lessons from magic, we talked about co-production as a process, not a label. And indigenous communities must lead the research design and should be like the research agendas and those things should be led by the community members before starting the project or before start organizing a community-based workshop. And genomics can support Arctic stewardship when it is ethically governed. And this could be a scalable model, like relationship building should be the essence of all collaboration and partnerships. And only then it will be relevant for Arctic policy, food security, and climate adaptation. And this, I want to highlight this quote from Deborah McGregor, that Indigenous knowledge is not just a knowledge, a noun, but a way of life, and something that must be lived in order to be understood. It's inseparable from the people who hold this and lives this knowledge. And call to action, like research uh, priorities should be community-led and respectful to indigenous data sovereignty. And there should be more long-term research projects, because relationship building takes time, and it's not something that happens overnight or in a few months. So there should be long-term research projects promoting ethical co-development practices and to explore the best ways to communicate genomics tools. Like, there are linguistic barriers and conceptual barriers. So they should be addressed in a way that is ethical and respectful. This is our project website in which I worked in my previous postdoc. I did. This was a part of my work, and I also did some rights holders and stakeholders interviews. And what I found is that genomics hold potential for co-management of Arctic biodiversity, but only when it is combined with indigenous knowledge, data governance, and meaningful partnerships. And the future of Arctic genomics, or any project, should be like a relational, not just technological. It begins with the people, land, language, and respect. With this, I would like to extend my gratitude to my team and all the collaborators, knowledge keepers, funding agencies, and thank you so much. And I want to say that love, care, and responsibility are the part of Indigenous relationships with animals, land, and they shape decisions in ways that cannot be captured by the data alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shivangi, for an excellent talk, you too. So we have 1 minute left. So are there any questions in the audience for you? I think your message was very clear, Shivanga. I also hear that you are using word like language. We that you are have to deal with that, and also respectfulness. That your connection to the indigenous knowledge also have to be relational, and not only explorative. So there's a lot of things that we can bring with us in this learning ourselves how to interact with the indigenous knowledge. So thank you so much, Shivanga. And from
Thank you.
here, we need to move on, unfortunately. We have a very tight program.
Yeah, but you have asked me one question in the starting, so I would like to answer that very briefly.
Do
That
that.
any collaboration starts with like relationship building. It should be, for me, it's ideally like a relationship building, not just based on the extractive research questions or practices. And there should be the spaces for knowledge holders where scientific community listen to them more. And for if we talk about conservation practitioners, it's like they should focus more on the applicability of the research project rather than just the ownership. And trust building takes time. This is like I experienced so far. So it takes time to build relationship, and respect is utmost importance. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank,
Shivanga, for
thank you.
your Next on our program is Christian Louis Jensen. We will actually opening up with your movie that will be shown now. So, and after that, you will come up and present yourself and the movie and the message in that.
I've seen firsthand that here in Greenland, the invisible pollution is affecting us in a very, very realistic way. I am researching microplastics, and what I think is that microplastics are transported through the air, making the glaciers absorb more heat, melt faster, but also release toxins into a pristine ecosystem such as this one. 1/3 of all microplastics are car tire particles. And why aren't we talking about this?
Across the state warning that a chemical from tire dust poses a major threat to coho salmon.
Our community has been exposed to large amounts of benzene in the air.
Cancer is the second leading cause of death among Inuit.
You should be sitting here with lumps in your throats and tears in your eyes, and if your stomach is tied up in knots, it means that there's healing happening. It means that we're touching your spirit.
We, the people living in the north, are being unfairly affected by the plastic pollution of the rest of the world. And I'm not giving up without a fight.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Arctic Frontiers for having me. And thank you, all of you, for being here. What you just saw was not a trailer. It's a teaser. And we are currently making a documentary designed to break the silence on car tire toxicity. We are now at the impact stage, where the final chapter is about to play out. The stage where we, together, have a unique opportunity to turn evidence into legislation. But in order to do that, we need to form a coalition. I propose a coalition because of two things that the Arctic gave me. She gave me a lesson and a sample. The lesson was one about belonging. And I, being the son of an Inuit mother, I must admit it took time for me to feel like I really belong in the Arctic. But as I paddled her waters and I slept on her shores, I realized that belonging is earned and is tied to the most fundamental lesson of the Arctic, is that here, mistakes cost lives. And I'm standing here with evidence of a collective mistake we are making, but one we still have time to learn from. That brings me to the second reason, or the second thing that the Arctic gave me, a sample. In 2022, I took a sample from my kayak in one of the most remote glaciers in all of Eastern Greenland. And when we analyzed that sample, we found what I feared but hoped not to: car tire particles. It still surprises people, perhaps in this room, at this conference. Not plastic bags, but tires. The sample I took on that glacier is proof that these particles have now reached the very start of the food chain and are settling where life is most fragile. Since that day, I have dedicated my life to changing this. And I have traveled all over the Arctic, meeting with indigenous knowledge holders, people who have witnessed these changes with their own eyes. I have seen how communities are impacted at the point of extraction, where the fossil fuels that make tires are pulled from the ground. And I realized I could not just sit in a lab. So since that day, I've used every holiday I've had. I've self-funded travels to 3 different UN meetings on the International Global Plastics Treaty. I volunteered with the Inuit Circle Polar Council, and I did all I could. Even today, I stand before you on a fragile, self-funded box, but with an unwavering commitment. I've traveled to all of these epicenters of global science, including this one, hoping to find a plan. Instead, I found blind spots and a very big dark room. In climate policy, we regulate what comes out of the tailpipe, but we ignore what comes off the tire. Car tire particles are fossil fuels in motion. They are a vector for chemicals we barely understand. Most of them we cannot even name, except for one, 6-PPD. Science only found this compound after decades of unexplained salmon die-offs. It took a lot of dedicated work and even a little bit of luck to identify 6-PPD. Today we know 2 things to be true about this compound. It was designed to prevent tires from cracking, and it's acutely lethal, even at nanogram concentrations. One chemical, billions of consequences. Already, I have been standing with indigenous leaders and mourned the dead salmon on Vancouver Island. I have breathed air with the Amjivang nations in Chemical Valley. I have read the cumulative report on how car tire particles genetically deform cod larvae even before they begin to eat. Arctic cod, skrejen that we are talking about, allergic to car tires. We don't know the full extent of car tire toxicity, but we are releasing these covert chemicals at a planetary scale. I realized that my sample from Greenland was just the alarm bell. But an alarm bell is useless if no one answers the call. And I cannot unravel this alone. The knowledge gaps are too big and the scale is too massive. That's why we need to form a coalition. So here is what the Arctic counts on us to do now. First, we form a strong intersectorial coalition that seeks to understand and give advice to policymakers on how car tire toxicity affect the health of Arctic species. Secondly, I would love for the scientists in this room to see the kayak differently. Kayaking began with a purpose. Yeah, I have 1 minute left. I have 10 concrete ideas for a global fleet of kayaking citizen science that could monitor microplastic, map kelp forests, count sea urchins, sample for 6-PPD and other harmful chemicals where large vessels cannot. Finally, I called my mother about the fairly hard-earned evidence of air-transported car tire particles to eastern Greenland. And she was not surprised at all. She remembers orange sand from the Sahara in Nanortalik, Greenland. And she thought this whole study was rather useless. That is to say, let's never forget that indigenous knowledge holders are the biggest database science have access to. Behind me is a QR code. It links to the coalition. I want all of you. Here's a QR code. And please scan it, and I'll be outside at the coffee machine afterwards. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. Wonderful movie. We have to move on. We are in a very tight schedule. So Kate Hortensia, have you come? Are you in the room? Welcome. So Kate is working on mapping the relationships between the benthos and other critters that lives on the seabed floor to Labrador Inuit values and people's everyday life. That is exciting. Please welcome.
Hi, everyone. I am Kate Hortensia. I'm originally from upstate New York in the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Haudenosaunee Nation. I'm a settler academic. I have the pleasure of working in Nunatsiavut with many, many friends and collaborators from Nunatsiavut. And I'm presenting this research on behalf of the entire group. So first I'm going to set up a little bit of the grounding of this work. So in Western systems, in Western scientific systems, usually we use intrinsic and instrumental values really to guide the process more than anything else. But a relational framework allows us to better understand the benthos as it relates to people. And a relational framework, what it is relationality values the connection between people and the natural world and prioritizes accountability within these relationships. And so it's really, really important to look at not like the objects, but the relationships between them and understand the significance of those relationships. And it's also an opportunity to look at systems from a non-hierarchical perspective. So let's ground in place. This is Nunatsiavut. It's on the eastern coast of Canada, facing the Labrador Sea. It's got about 7,000 islands, 17,000 kilometers of coastline, 5 communities, 1,800 people, and is about the size of Scotland to, understand from a European perspective about how big it is. And so I'm going to talk about methodology very, very quickly. It's as important as the results, if not more important than the results, especially in a room like this. So these processes were co-designed with the Nunatsiavut Government Research Center, as well as lots and lots of trial and error and conversations with community members. And so what I'm presenting, and so we did interviews, about 40 interviews in all five of the communities, and asked about relationships, asked about stories, wanted to understand people's relationships to the benthos and have the benthos defined by people themselves. And so here is the first dimension of what this looks like, and these are the relationships within the benthos. And so I want to emphasize, I'm used to walking around. It's very weird being tied to a microphone. I don't like it. The laser doesn't do justice, but each one of these circles, the size represents how many times, more or less, that this particular species was mentioned. And then the weight or the thickness of these lines represents how many different times those stories were told. And so you can see examples of these stories. So this becomes a map of stories. And so just a couple of examples. We used to haul up live rock, which is coralline algae or merle, in commercial scallop trawls. There was more of it than there was scallops. And you can see down here, I see little eggs stuck to the goosegrass, but I don't know what species they are. I see some baby lumpfish too. They're in the goosegrass. I don't see big lumpfish anymore. And then we're going to add dimensions to this. And so imagine almost like tracing, for example, if you look at mussel and just tracing and seeing all the connections that it has when you go through these different dimensions of relationships. And so here we're looking at the relationships across the marine terrestrial divide. We have benthic species, marine mammals, birds, terrestrial plants, pelagic fish, and terrestrial animals. One thing that's fundamentally important, especially when doing research in the Arctic, as I'm sure many of you know, is to take away that concept that we have of some sort of divide between the land and the sea. These are continuous places and continuous environments. And so we wanted to respect that. And you can see even here, oh, wrong button. You can see chickens here because more and more people are starting to raise chickens. And for example, mussels have been really, really important to that. Even people that don't like eating mussels or don't feel safe eating mussels will still harvest mussels to feed their chickens and to provide them calcium. So it's it becomes deep, these relationships. And here we have the relationships between benthic species, activities, and locations. You're not meant to read these, they're too small. It's just, I want to keep you in mind that these are stories connecting all of these different things. And so here we have cabins and tide pools and commercial fishing, subsistence fishing in all different ways, egging, crafting, research, education, ceremony. And then here we have the relationships between the benthos and themes. And themes is not a very good word for this. These are like important things that people talked about and came out of the relationships. And one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on this is because we're used to, especially if you work in climate spaces, you hear a lot of doom and gloom. And we wanted to really talk about joy. We wanted to understand how these relationships support resilience and all the different ways in which resilience is and resilience could be and resilience was, and get a really good idea of that. So you see that wonder is huge on this because the benthos is weird. There is weird stuff down there. Kids love it. It's fun. People talked about it connecting them to their youth and connecting intergenerational relationships. Grandparents would go out with their grandkids and explore and learn new things with them. And so these experiences are really fundamental to what resilience is, and we wanted to make sure that these kind of experiences were also captured in the social ecological network, so it's not just who's eating who, for example. So one thing I want to point out from some of the more, like number results of this is the kind of the mismatch that you can see. Mussels come up a lot when you look at the centrality, which is kind of like what holds things together in these networks. And I want to point this out because mussels are not really researched in lots of places, especially when it comes to subsistence harvesting. More or less, the only research you can find on mussels is about aquaculture. And so you could start to understand a mismatch between when we come in with our external values, what we think is important to research compared to what is important to research when you talk to people on the ground. Example of that and how that mismatch can happen and the consequences of that mismatch. But also, I want to point to resilience and diversity. You can see so many different benthic species represented here. And this is really shows the fabric of what resilience looks like, just even when you're looking at how the benthos ties into the social ecological system. And that resilience is special, and it's wonderful, and it gives us strength. So it's really important to recognize that. And so here's some next steps. This is very work in progress, but we really wanted to better understand, what are the causes of changes, and then what are the effects of these changes. And boy, it's really complicated, and these things play out in really, really interesting ways. And you can read this by looking at, like, for example, temperature, a change in temperature can affect or is affecting the abundance of seaweed. And so this is value neutral. It's not saying more or less. It's just saying that there is change happening in this system. And so when we spend a lot of time figuring out what the, what's important to research when we're trying to make these decisions, it just really emphasizes the importance of talking to people and being strategic about that to understand what's actually going on, what are people seeing, and being able to better target where we put our energy when it comes to all the choices that we have about what we decide to research and putting our own external values aside when we do that. This is very I'm not a statistician, I've had some help with here, but just to emphasize, seaweed, green hair algae, which is a turf algae, cod, and lumpfish represented larger amounts of change in relative to other animals and plants in this system. And so this is all measuring relative relationships. And so even though not many people talked about lumpfish, when they talked about lumpfish, they talked about change. So that's a really important thing to note. I think I'll leave it there. And so one of the things that we're doing to make sure that this is all getting back to community in an appropriate way is I'm working with my co-author and buddy, James Jack from Postville, to build an animation to return these stories that people talked about and to close out the project in a good way. And also we're adding a spatial element to this. And so what does this change look like on the ground and where? Using a lot of GoPros for that, and so that paper is coming out soon. But if you'd like to read more about this, here's the paper that came out about it. And yeah, I'm sorry I'm a little bit over, but I got excited. I think I'm out of time, so I'll hang out if anybody wants to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was really exciting and very interesting perspective that you pull in here. Yeah, we have to talk. Next speaker here will be Justin Langen. Justin, you are a leader, an activist, and a social entrepreneur who works spans both human rights, environmental sustainability, indigenous advocacy, and youth empowerment. We are very interested in listening to your talk. So welcome, and you have 10 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, Tanche Kematen, good morning. So yeah, my name's Justin. I'm a Métis youth from Winnipeg, Manitoba, but I grew up in the rural community of Swan River, Manitoba, Canada. So I work with Indigenous youth and communities through Okanada, which is with other Indigenous youth. And we work in climate engagement, eco-literacy, and we work with a lot of different communities pertaining to Indigenous youth, providing programs and supports. So today I'll be speaking about I'll be talking very broadly in terms of what I and Okanada has learned from our various engagements for the past 3 years working with youth in the Arctic, and how we can adapt it into these sort of conversations, specifically how Indigenous youth and communities experience, interpret, and make sense of environmental change over time. So it's grounded in lived experience and the long-term relationships with place rather than a sort of single data set or case study. So yeah, in many Arctic and Northern contexts, climate change is not experienced in isolation. So it unfolds alongside existing environmental, social, and economic pressures, including the changes in livelihoods, infrastructure, and the access to land and water. So we all know this, it accumulates over time. But from a community perspective, environmental change is often gradual and uneven. It doesn't always appear as a clear threshold or a single disruptive event. Instead, it is experienced as a sort of series of small shifts that build upon each other, sometimes subtly and often differently from place to place. So when we look at the cumulative nature of change, it's important because it shapes how ecosystems are accessed, used, and understood on a daily basis. It influences the decisions around travel, harvesting, and safety, often long before those impacts are formally identified or documented through these conventional monitoring systems. So as a result, the cumulative impacts are not only ecological in nature, they're also deeply connected to how people relate to, depend on, and plan around their environments. So I wanted to sort of disperse it into a core visual and keep it as minimalistic as possible in terms of how we view the Arctic and how we view communities. Because when you view that, what are you observing? Well, what I've learned and what, when we talk to Indigenous youth in Arctic communities, when we talk about environmental change, they rarely describe it in terms of single variables or isolated indicators. Instead, they describe change through patterns that affect everyday decisions and relationships with place. So there's 3 themes that sort of come up all the time. The first is timing. When seasons begin and end, how long they last, and how reliable those transitions feel from year to year. Small shifts in timing can have outsized effects on activities that depend on seasonal conditions, particularly when those shifts are uneven or unpredictable. The second is access. This is how environmental change affects the ability to travel, harvest, or safely use land and water. So this could be changes in ice, snow, or weather conditions. It can alter routes and windows of opportunity, ability, but also the food practices and cultural activities that are tied to a specific place. And the third is predictability. The growing uncertainty around conditions that were once familiar and dependable. Even when change is gradual, increasing unpredictability can make planning more difficult and heighten risk in everyday interactions with the environment. So these observations are sort of grounded in lived experience and long-term relationships with specific places. They emerge through repeated interaction with land and water over time, and they often surface well before the changes are formally captured through monitoring frameworks or data sets. And of course, that's in reference to indigenous ecological knowledge. So, what is this gap and what is my specific contribution? So, this is something that we've talked about for a while in terms of what should we address, how should we address it, what can we do, especially me as an Indigenous young person. So environmental monitoring and assessment often rely on isolated indicators, short-term project timelines, and limited local context. These approaches are essential and produce critical insights, but they can struggle to fully capture cumulative impacts as they are experienced at the community level, particularly when change is gradual, uneven, or deeply place-specific. So in many cases, what communities are noticing does not fit neatly within existing frameworks or project cycles. As a result, important aspects of environmental change, especially those that shape day-to-day decision-making, can remain underrepresented in how impacts are assessed or communicated. So my work does not attempt to replace scientific monitoring or generate new data sets. Instead, it focuses on centering Indigenous youth perspectives, supporting eco-literacy and climate engagement, and crafting spaces, creating spaces within communities, going to different Arctic communities, as rural and northern as possible, to define what environmental change means to them in their own terms. So when we work with Indigenous youth and any community within the Arctic, we want to ensure that they are able to articulate their priorities, their observations, and their concerns. And this approach helps provide the contextual insight that can complement the scientific assessments. It offers a far better way to understand how cumulative impacts are unfolding over time and why certain changes matter locally, even when they are difficult to quantify. So I'll conclude with one takeaway. Cumulative impacts require cumulative understanding. If we want to better understand how ecosystems are changing, we need approaches that recognize how environmental change is experienced over time, alongside social, cultural, and economic pressures, not only how it is measured in isolation. Taking community experience seriously does not weaken scientific assessment. It strengthens it by adding context, continuity, and relevance. Thank you, Marcy, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
So we actually have 2 minutes, and there's a question there.
Thank you very much for a great talk. From the perspective of communities living there, what's the most important criteria? Is it accessibility, is it timing, or is it predictability?
Very good question. And that's, so we're trying to isolate it, I see, okay. Yeah, I think it's the unpredictability, especially now. There's a shadow of foreboding, I think, that looms over the Arctic, and that's increasingly noticed as we talk to more communities, especially as a young person. We can't predict what's going to happen. And imagine a child living in an Arctic community. What can they think? They can't understand the geopolitical tensions of the world. They only see worry in their community, worry in their parents, and I think the unpredictability in their land and how much food costs and how they're getting food and how their family is doing mentally and physically. So I think that unpredictability, as is with time and access, it covers everything. But I think it's something that can be addressed when engaging with that community. And I think, for me, communication has always been the key to all of this. And I think there's diversity in communication as well. When you go into a research context, into a community, a lot of the times you have preconceived notions, you have a question that needs to be answered. And I think it's been said here today, and it's been said a lot this week, that we need to go in with a common understanding that we don't know everything, that there's stuff we can learn about the community, about the Arctic, that it is inherently non-scientific. I think it's rooted in community. And for me, the Arctic is symbiotic with indigeneity. Without one, you can't have the other. And that's what I've realized when working with Indigenous youth. So unpredictability is the key, but I think with all the amazing work we're doing here, we could help salvage that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mon. And with this very, very wise words from our young people who are upgrowing and taking over from us, and I'm very happy for that. I will introduce our last speaker from ICC, Canada. This is Matthew Summit Mahempel. Yeah. You are the Director of Policy of Policy Initiative of Inuit Circumpolar Council, ICC. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks to the organizers. Earlier this morning, we had Dr. Liz, if I may. You were bringing out the foot stomp to try to engage. I know the Arctic Frontiers organizers told us to be sure to engage the crowd. So can I hear everybody just one clap right now? Okay, we're all awake. We're good. Okay. So I'll talk here today about Indigenous knowledge in international frameworks. So I think since I'm the last presenter, I do want to pick up some threads that I heard earlier today. So Morgan talking about holistic approaches. Shivangi mentioned Inuit Hauyumayatukangit. And then in the trailer, we also had a mention of black carbon. So these are all issues that ICC, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, works on. And I'm really glad to hear some of the approaches too that people talked about today. So to introduce myself, my name is Matthew. I work at the Inuit Circumpolar Council, or ICC. I'm also ICC's rep at the Arctic Council for the Sustainable Development Working Group, and one of the SDWG vice chairs. In terms of where I came from, my mom's side of the family is originally from Nunatsiavut. So everybody but Kate, I'm gonna use a laser here, and you're gonna stop me when I get to Nunatsiavut. Can anybody, let's hear the clap, okay? Kate, you're not allowed to answer that. There we go. Okay. And my dad's side of the family is European, and I grew up in Southern Ontario in Canada. So ICC represents about 180,000 Inuit across Chukotka in Russia, Alaska, Canada, and Kalalit Nunaat in Greenland. We've been around for about 50 years and promoting Arctic collaboration and Inuit unity. We're one of the permanent participants at the Arctic Council and one of the co-founders, and we have consultative status at the United Nations. So there's many forums that we engage in. If you like climate change acronyms, we have the UNFCCC COPS, the IPCC, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, the Stockholm Convention on POPs, AMAP. I'll stop there. A big piece of our work at ICC is to uphold and advance the ways of working with Inuit. And to do this, I want to use some time today to talk about Indigenous knowledge data, and I'll use a case study of the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, or the CAOFA, or CAUFA. So in academia, we often hear this shift from something like scientific research says to something more like the best available knowledge says. So this small shift is talking about big ideas. We have Western scientific knowledge, we have indigenous knowledge, and these being named as equal sources of knowledge to be drawn from in agreement texts, especially international agreements, is something that I want to talk about a bit today. So recognizing that IK, or indigenous knowledge, can stand on its own and its own merits is important. And the people who have witnessed and documented the environment, the changing climate for centuries, that their knowledge can be part of this equation. And at the same time, bringing forward those two types of knowledge together to, well, create better things. So about the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, or CAUFA, this is an international agreement signed by 10 parties and is designed to prevent unregulated fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean. The agreement text calls for a precautionary approach to management that safeguards healthy marine ecosystems and ensures an understanding that the ecosystem study it before any decisions are made. I will note that Inuit leaders from Greenland, Alaska, and Canada were there as part of the national delegations during the negotiation of this international agreement. And we're still there now during the implementation portion. Actually, some of my colleagues right now are in one of those meetings at the other end of the world right now. Again, I'll state, it was said in a bit of the earlier presentations, but Inuit are rights holders in the Arctic, not stakeholders. So it's important that the activities that take place both in the CAO and also in the surrounding areas, recognizing that that affects communities that are on the coast. And again, on the map here, we see the Arctic Ocean and the Central Arctic Ocean donut. It's not highlighted, but we have there, and then all the communities that run along it. So the marine mammals that Inuit hunt and fish, they know no boundaries. So that's why taking this holistic approach to understanding the ecosystem and how it interacts with people especially is very important. So at ICC, we've worked to ensure inclusion of this term indigenous knowledge in the agreement text, and also to build that out in the implementation. So that means the working groups, and when international scientists come together to figure out, okay, so the agreement text that was signed has the words, you know, taking into account scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge. But now what? The question we get asked is, well, how do we make that work? And I think today we heard some examples from some of the panelists of cooperation with Nunatsiavut, with other Inuit rights holding organizations that have identified or want to see research areas expand into that. And especially on the coast, along the areas and the communities that are close to the Central Arctic Ocean, having those communities involved and aware of these processes is important. So really what we try to do is bring these types of existing projects that have been worked on from the community level, the regional level, the national level, and bring those to international settings. Because often we get asked by scientists, well, where are your peer-reviewed studies? Where are these examples that you want to show to us? So I think that's really important to say that it's not us doing the research all the time, but also bringing in those people who've done those research in a good way with communities. So I'll just show a slide here about Inuit helping to shape some of the foundational CAOFA documents. So there's something called the Joint Program of Scientific Research and Monitoring, or the JPSRM, if you love acronyms. And that's where we get into this idea of how science and data-heavy sections play out. So there's just some examples here on the screen of different documents from the CAOFA process that ICC has worked at and worked with parties to ensure that the right to data, including data collection and disaggregation, there's an understanding there about the fundamental human right for Indigenous peoples, that data management and right to own, control, and make decisions around how that data is used is key to Inuit self-determination and Inuit governance. And again, right now where we're at is where this part where we want to involve regional Inuit organizations, work with people, advance these data policies that are being developed at the regional and at the regional level, and really bring those understandings into international forums, because that's the piece that's missing, and that's the piece that people are asking us for. In some of the publications, we have some reference to something called the EEE protocols, or the ethical protocols for equitable and ethical engagement. There's also other types of documents that ICC and other Inuit organizations have that can help guide researchers in this work. With the remaining time, I just want to turn to a map here. We had a lot of maps today, so I want to go back to this one. So it's important to recognize how our knowledge is used to account not only how Indigenous knowledge holders choose to share that knowledge, but also the holistic way of knowing. So again, if you take just one piece of the puzzle or one piece of this knowledge on its own, you might just get one piece, but understanding how the different pieces come together is really important as a whole. So in closing, I'm here at an international conference, not to scare away researchers, but just to remind you of the important rules, protocols, and people that you must be accountable to in your work and in your research. That's the Arctic Indigenous peoples who live in those areas that have been studied for decades, but this is something that we know needs to change. It's not enough to just say that I'm not one of those bad ethical lines. If you're working to understand a community and the impacts within it, you have that responsibility to work meaningfully with these people to ensure proper collaboration. And you have that task of working meaningfully to ensure that the work benefits the communities that you work with. Even if you don't have a colonial mindset, I know some institutions as well might have some remnants of that. So ensuring that you can recognize, re-examine processes is very important. So with that, Nakomik, thank you.
Yes, questions, yeah.
I have a very last quick question for the last speaker, and thank you for all the presentations. But mainly, it's actually yesterday the sentence, military brings sustainable development, was said and unchallenged in a panel. And I really just wanted to invite you to maybe give a different perspective of what sustainable development in the Arctic looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, when it comes to sustainable development, I think the big piece of, I can speak at least for the Arctic Council too, a big piece is like bringing that human element. And that's where a lot of the work happens. I think the examples I talked about today also really prioritize that human element and working with people to understand that. So yeah, maybe just start with that. But I know we have some time now for... Oh, okay. Yes, we have another question.
I
yes.
thought you wanted to continue. That's why I
No,
didn't.
no, please.
Okay. All right, so Matthew, great. Thank you very much for a great talk. And this question that I'm going to raise is probably quite big, so I'm asking, because which I also prompt, or the room. There is more to IK than data. There is also a recognized shift in sustainability science to relational ability. That has been proposed a couple of years back. It basically means that rather than looking at the things only, we should look at the relations between things in order to manage better. And this is a session on ecosystems where we have focused, of course, a lot on humans, because that's where we start our management. There's so much more to relational ability in sustainability science and research and management. There's so much more about relational ability in IK. There's the big contributions that come from indigenous peoples around the world to inform this turn in sustainability science. So natural law, for example, how we are actually having indigenous deep recognition of coexistence and mutual responsibilities and reciprocities. My question is, how do you maybe in ICC promote more than IK in data use? how can we actually move from there to actually inform our management systems with that relationability? What should we do in your perspective, in your view, to foster that?
Thank you. Definitely a big question. I think maybe to start, you mentioned relationality, so maybe I'll just start with processes. So understanding processes and having the time to sit down when you have those working group meetings, at those international conferences, there's always there's a rush to get things done, approve text and all that stuff. But I think when you get to those working group levels, having those processes, bringing examples and having that discussion. And again, this isn't just a discussion about what is Indigenous knowledge. It does go beyond that. It goes into, well, what does it look like to work with Inuit? What are the steps to get there? What are the best practices? And I think bringing those best practices together to show that is the start. And then people then there's a bit of an understanding, a bit of an opening up of, okay, I see this is a bit different. Not different in a bad way, but different in a way that I'm not used to in terms of the processes and the steps that I do to get research published and to work. So I think that's a really important piece. Maybe I'll just start with that and then maybe come back to something else. I don't know if anybody else, I know this is a question maybe to the other panelists. I don't want to take all the stage here, so.
Yeah, so we can say thank you to all the speakers. That has been an excellent session. And we still have some few minutes, so we can get the panel up here and they will answer your questions. So do any one of you have questions? Let's start.
So I found all of the talks today very inspiring, and I just think, especially with some of you who work with youth, as a first generation person trying to go through academia and struggling through bureaucracy, but also struggling with the fact that if you don't have the credentials, you struggle to find a voice in a stage like this. So I just wonder for some of you how you view bringing Indigenous people or even youth to stages like this and moving beyond just talking about them as a representative. Maybe moving beyond credentials or ladders, but also holding the same power of voice in these decisions and in science.
Was that a question for Justin, or?
I think that's for everybody, because everybody kind of spoke to different parts of
Yeah, I could just touch on that. I think that's a great question, because as someone who goes to a lot of conferences and speaks as an Indigenous youth, it's something that, how do you balance inclusion without risking tokenism or infantilizing the content that the youth is presenting? But I think if organizations, and you want to get into a more colonial or bureaucratic area, you have to showcase that, you as a young person are able, you being a young person in this day and age is in itself a credential, and I think more and more people are beginning to realize that. But you have to have a responsibility, I think, to yourself, to not, to know your worth and to not, risk the infantilization that might come about either ignorantly or unjustly. So I think, I started in my home community in Swan River. I've been doing this for 10 years. So it is a ladder, but it is a way in which, there are more areas like ICC, Arctic Council. A lot of areas within the Arctic are becoming more youth-oriented and doing so with the help of youth leadership. So I think, especially in post-secondary, leveraging community ties, I think, from that university or college, and embracing youth leadership, because being a youth itself is a way you can leverage your worth. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Okay, I'm trying. I usually kind of go on tangents, so I'll try to keep it focused. The first part being is I think it's important within research and when you engage with youth in research to hold that space for also youth to have their voice and not just have me amplify it in these spaces. So what we did as part of the photoist activity is the youth presented what they did, their message at a fundraiser supper, and we worked with them to kind of do a presentation for them to learn how to and gain more public speaking skills and like these little pockets of capacity sharing or knowledge sharing to build up that confidence to speak up in different spaces. And I think another part of it is also realizing that a lot of the funding often supports, a student or a certain part of the project and doesn't fund beyond the research, so there needs to be more space to look at other ways to engage in knowledge mobilization and supporting the people who shared their knowledge to be able to disseminate it more broadly. So that's things that I think about and I'm working on and applying to hopefully get some funding to get youth to come together and learn from each other and share in different spaces. But, yeah.
So more funding we need. Together, take the time, figure out the results. So next question.
Thank you. I can see we're running out of time. I've been working in this space for over a dozen years, and there's one idea floating to the top, and that an O, which these one-off projects rarely serve the communities. They may get you your PhD, but they don't come back to the community. So, excuse me, I have a cold. I encourage all you PIs to go for the long term. Stay in the same communities. You may have more than one PhD candidate going in there, but we need to add an O to FPIC. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here and listening. It was a very inspiring and fulfilling session. So thank you to the speakers. And Casey, thank you. Yeah, thank you.